Welcome back to True Echo, the channel where real power meets real stories. Today's tale isn't just about a stolen airplane seat, it's about silence breaking, justice landing, and a woman who refused to shrink. What started as mockery at 38,000 feet became a national wake-up call. Buckle in, because this story hits turbulence fast. Alicia Monroe walked with purpose. The kind of purpose that didn't need an audience to feel powerful. Her heels tapped a calm, rhythmic confidence on the polished airport floor as she moved through the terminal toward Gate 32A. Her black tailored suit was crisp, her hair perfectly pinned back, and her eyes, clear, steady, no nonsense, told a story all their own. She wasn't just anyone. She was the founder and CEO of Acciona Tech, a billion-dollar firm on the verge of its most historic acquisition yet. In less than 24 hours, Alicia would sit at the head of a multi-billion-dollar table and finalize a merger that could redefine cybersecurity worldwide. First class wasn't a luxury today, it was a strategic move. Sleep. Quiet. Prep time. When she reached the boarding gate, a polite nod to the staff and a quick scan of her ticket later, she was walking down the jet bridge. As always, she ignored the subtle double-takes. The barely there eyebrow raises. The tiny moments of tension people pretended weren't there when a powerful black woman walked through elite spaces. Inside the plane, Alicia turned into the first-class cabin and looked toward her seat, 1A. Except someone was already in it. A tall white man, late 40s, slouched like he owned the air itself. He had a drink in one hand and his legs spread wide like it was his living room. He barely looked up. Alicia, certain it was a mistake, paused gently and offered a soft, "Excuse me. I believe that's my seat." He chuckled, but it was sharp, dismissive. "You, in first class? That's rich." His laugh burst into the air like a bad smell. Two other men seated nearby joined in, chuckling like it was some frat boy reunion. Alicia didn't move. She simply held up her boarding pass. The flight attendant stepped forward. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" "This is my seat, 1A, Alicia said, not accusingly, but firmly. The flight attendant looked at her, then looked at the man. And hesitated. That pause said everything. "I'm sorry, maybe we can move you to business class," the attendant offered in a whisper. Just to avoid conflict. Alicia's stare remained unblinking. "No. This is my seat." The man leaned back in his chair, sipped his drink, and muttered, "Maybe you took a wrong turn cleaning." Crews in the back. A few heads turned. No one intervened. The temperature dropped. Alicia didn't yell. Didn't flinch. Instead, she opened her phone, pulled up the airline app, and calmly showed the flight attendant the confirmation, the elite status, the payment history. The crew member shifted uneasily and went to call a supervisor. Meanwhile, the man in the seat barked, "Look, maybe you belong in the back, but I'm not giving up my seat for some diversity hire." That did it. The cabin went silent. No more chuckles. Just uncomfortable breathing. Alicia didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her silence was louder than any outburst. The supervisor arrived with a tight smile and a forced calm. Another plea to just take another seat for now. Alicia refused again. Passengers began whispering. Some pulling out phones. One man in 1C subtly raised his camera, framing Alicia's composed posture beside the white man lounging in her seat. Another 5 minutes passed. Then the captain came out. "A problem?" he asked the flight attendant quietly. "She's insisting that's her seat," the attendant replied. "It is my seat," Alicia said, now facing the captain. The pilot blinked, unsure. He turned to the man in 1A. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" The man scowled. "It's not about the seat. It's about her attitude." The captain exhaled, already feeling the weight of a social media disaster. He nodded to the gate agent, who discreetly radioed the ground crew. Then something shifted. Alicia calmly tapped a few buttons on her phone and played a voice recording. "Hi, Ms. Monroe. This is Lindsay from Axiona's VIP services. We've confirmed your elite status, and seat 1A is fully reserved under your name." It was undeniable. It was proof. And it was played loud enough for the front cabin to hear. The captain looked up from the screen, face blank. The gate agent reappeared moments later, with 2 uniformed TSA officers behind him. No one breathed. "Sir," one officer said, stepping toward the white man, "please gather your belongings. You are being removed from the aircraft for failure to comply with airline seating regulations and for verbally harassing a fellow passenger." The man's mouth dropped. "What? She's the problem. She's aggressive." The officers didn't flinch. "Sir, now." As he was escorted off the plane, a woman in row 2 clapped once. Then another joined. Then a few more. The man twisted around, flushed with disbelief and shame. But it was done. Alicia said nothing. She slid gracefully into 1A. Straight-backed. Poised. Powerful. Her eyes stared forward, not at anyone, not for approval. Just forward. Ready. Power had shifted in that moment. Not with shouting. Not with threats. With proof. With dignity. And the world would soon see what real power looked like. The air felt thick, dense with something that had nothing to do with altitude. The hum of the aircraft seemed louder now. More present. Like even the engines were unsure of what had just happened. The flight resumed its final boarding. Passengers filed past Alicia with quick glances, some awkward, others guilty, a few admiring. Most said nothing. But they looked. They saw her. The seat beside her, 1B, remained empty for now. The attendant returned, carefully placing a fresh glass of still water on Alicia's tray table. Her voice trembled as she said, "Let us know if you need anything at all, Ms. Monroe." Alicia gave a polite nod but didn't respond. Not out of rudeness. But because she knew what was happening now had very little to do with her hydration. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes briefly. In her chest was that familiar weight. The one that came not from confrontation, but from the toll of constantly having to stand. Stand for truth. Stand for respect. Stand when others sit by and watch injustice unfold like a casual movie. It was always the same: smile, correct them gently, don't be the angry black woman, keep your tone calm, speak facts. Always facts. And even then, maybe, you'd be heard. She adjusted the cuff of her blouse. A gift from her late mother, who used to say, "Never let them catch you flinching, baby. Your grandmother cleaned their offices. You build them now." The plane pushed back from the gate. The safety instructions began. Alicia didn't look up. She'd heard them 100 times. She was flying to New York to close a $2.4 billion merger with Trian Systems, an all-white, old-guard tech firm that had finally agreed to merge with her company after years of fighting her market disruption. Trian was traditional, territorial, and not thrilled about being absorbed by a firm led by a black woman. But money talks. And Alicia's company, Axiona, had built the better product. Period. Her phone buzzed gently in her bag. She reached in discreetly, pulling it out just enough to see a name flash across the screen. Mark Reynolds, Axiona Legal Team. She swiped and read. Saw the video. Someone recorded the whole thing. It's already on Twitter. 200K views and counting. She exhaled through her nose. Of course they did. She tapped back. Let it ride. No statement yet. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, murmurs had returned to the cabin. Alicia sat unmoving, her mind turning back to the man in her seat, the arrogance in his smirk, the cruelty behind the joke. Not one of them had cared who she was. Only what she looked like. What if I wasn't Alicia Monroe? What if I didn't have elite status, a seat confirmation, a recording? What if I had moved quietly to the back? No one would have known. No one would have cared. The world would have kept turning with a quiet injustice swept under a rug yet again. She reached for her laptop. Time to prep. But just before she could open it, a soft voice from behind startled her. "Excuse me, Ms. Monroe." She turned. A young white woman in her late 20s stood there nervously, flight attendant uniform slightly wrinkled, hands twisting the corner of her apron. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For what happened. I should have said something sooner. We all should have. Alicia paused. Not angry. Just, tired. What's your name? She asked. Jessica. Alicia nodded. Jessica, thank you. I hope next time, you say it when it matters. Jessica's eyes welled just slightly, and she nodded before stepping away. The words weren't cruel. They were honest. And sometimes that's the sharpest blade. At 38,000 feet, surrounded by clouds and luxury, Alicia should have been reviewing contracts. Instead, she was managing fallout. Already her inbox buzzed with emails from board members and PR advisors, asking how they should respond to the viral video. But Alicia had learned this before: if you chase every fire with a hose, you'll never build anything that lasts. She scrolled through the video silently. It was just under 90 seconds. Someone from the second row had captured the entire exchange: the smirk, the seat denial, the recording, the officers walking in, the removal. The angle framed her like she was already a statue in a history book. The comments were exploding. She's class. The crew should be ashamed. This is every corporate flight I've ever been on. People don't believe we belong. Her silence was louder than a scream. Why did the crew try to move her? Fire the flight attendant. Alicia closed her phone. It wasn't time yet. Not for the press. Not for a statement. Right now, it was time to land. The captain's voice came over the intercom an hour later. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting our descent into New York shortly. Local time is 6:43 p.m. The weather is sunny and clear. Thank you for flying with us today. Alicia fastened her seatbelt and looked out the window as Manhattan's lights came into view, golden in the fading sun. Tomorrow, she'd face an even bigger room filled with even bigger egos. And this time, they wouldn't be able to ignore her or talk over her. Because she'd already proven something today. To the man who thought she was nothing. To the crew who thought she'd fold. To the cameras that thought this would be another moment swallowed by silence. Alicia Monroe didn't flinch. And power didn't ask permission to exist. The car waiting at JFK was black, sleek, and quiet, the kind that knew better than to talk. Alicia slid into the back seat, finally allowing her posture to soften slightly. Her body felt heavy, but not with fatigue. With awareness. She had just gone viral without trying, without speaking much, without lifting a finger to fight. And yet it always came down to this: the burden of being both the symbol and the solution. Her assistant, Brianna, called just as the car turned onto the Van Wyck Expressway. "I assume you've seen it?" Brianna asked, skipping formalities. "I lived it," Alicia replied, her voice flat. "It's past 2 million views. Already trending under #SeatForRespect and #SheBelongs. The airline hasn't said a word yet, but reporters are reaching out. CNN, Forbes, even Tech Insider." Alicia tilted her head. Tech Insider. Interesting. They're tying it to your merger. Framing it like, this is who's about to own half the cybersecurity market, deal with it. Good. That meant pressure. And pressure, used right, became leverage. "What about Trian's people?" Alicia asked. "They've gone radio silent." We had a prep call scheduled for this evening, but it was cancelled. Alicia smirked. They're panicking. They don't know how to walk into a boardroom tomorrow without looking like they're crawling back. And she was right. By the time the car pulled up to her hotel, her inbox had exploded with internal pings. From board members, lawyers, friends, even a few past enemies trying to suddenly sound supportive. But Alicia wasn't new to this game. She'd been underestimated her entire life. What they didn't realize yet was, this wasn't even her final move. The next morning, she walked into the Tryon boardroom at 9:02 a.m. Every man in that room wore the same tie, just in different shades of denial. They stood when she entered, some out of courtesy, others because it suddenly felt like survival. Alicia's team flanked her, 3 top execs from Acciona, all razor sharp, 2 of them women, one of them openly gay. It was no accident. She built her company like she lived her life, intentionally. At the head of the table sat Harold Kingsley, Tryon's longtime chairman. He looked like every mid-century movie boss, slick hair, starched shirt, eyes that never fully blinked. He extended a hand as she approached. "Ms. Monroe. A pleasure. Quite the flight, I heard." "Good morning, Harold," Alicia replied coolly, accepting his handshake but not his subtext. "Let's talk about the merger." They began reviewing the structure, equity swaps, leadership transitions, IP integration. But underneath it all, the tension was thick. Everyone in the room had seen the video. No one had the courage to mention it. Until Alicia did. "I'll be keeping the seat of CEO," she said, mid-discussion. Several heads turned. "That wasn't the original proposal," one Tryon executive interrupted. "It is now," Alicia said. Her tone was calm, but final. "The board may have concerns about public perception," another man muttered. "You mean the public perception that your company was just saved by a black woman whose very presence was mocked 30,000 feet in the air?" "I think perception's already working in our favor," she said, leaning forward. Harold cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Ms. Monroe." "Respect is the only reason I'm here, Harold," she said, cutting him off without raising her voice. "But I don't come here to ask for it. I come here to demonstrate why I already deserve it." A pause. Then silence. Then Harold nodded. Slowly. "Understood." Just like that, power shifted again. Not because she threatened them. Because she knew the value she brought, and was no longer willing to shrink to fit their comfort. By 3 p.m., the deal was closed. Alicia Monroe would remain CEO of the newly merged Tryon Acciona Group. The announcement would go live the next morning. But before that, Alicia had a different message to deliver. She called Brianna on the way back to the hotel. "Draft a statement for social," Alicia instructed. "Just a single sentence. Go on." She said it slowly, each word chosen like a bullet or a prayer. "Your dignity is not up for negotiation." Brianna paused. "That's it? That's everything." By 6 p.m., the statement was posted. By 7 p.m., the tweet had 600,000 likes. By 10 p.m., the airline finally issued a public apology, citing failure to uphold its commitment to equity and respect and promising an immediate overhaul of staff training protocols. But that wasn't all. They announced a new initiative, an anti-discrimination training program named the Monroe Protocol, inspired by Alicia's viral moment and now led by a diverse panel of DEI experts. The woman they tried to move out of her seat was now the reason they were forced to build a better culture, at 38,000 feet and beyond. Back at her hotel, Alicia stood in front of the mirror. Not smiling. Not crying. Just standing. Because sometimes, that's all it takes to shake the world. By morning, Alicia Monroe wasn't just a tech CEO anymore. She was the face of a new national conversation. News segments replayed the footage with slow-motion clarity. Headlines dissected every frame. CEO denied seat in first class because she's black, watch what happens. Cable news anchors debated airline policy. Commentators screamed across split screens. But something else was happening too. The comments weren't just sympathy. They were personal. Story after story from other passengers, workers, and everyday people flooded every platform. I've worked for 3 airlines. I've seen this happen more times than I can count, thank you, Alicia. My mom was a nurse for 30 years and got asked to prove she belonged in first class every flight. This felt like justice. They told me to sit in the back too. You stood for all of us. And quietly, almost secretly, messages came into Alicia's private inbox as well. From women in corporate America. From teenage girls in debate teams. From janitors. From CEOs. One from a 14-year-old girl named Tanisha read. They laughed when I ran for class president. Said I didn't look like a leader. I saw your video last night and printed your quote on my locker. I won today. Thank you for not sitting down. Alicia closed her laptop slowly after that one. She let the message sink in, not just the words, but the truth beneath them. This wasn't just about her anymore. 2 days after the merger, Alicia returned to Acciona headquarters. Her staff welcomed her with thunderous applause, but she only smiled briefly, placing one hand over her heart before walking straight into the executive conference room. She had a company to lead. The leadership team gathered for a post-merger strategy session. There were now more eyes than ever watching. Not just competitors and investors. But the public. Every decision Alicia made from here forward would carry weight, for better or worse. Her CTO, Karen DuPont, a fierce and brilliant black woman in her 40s, leaned in as they discussed global expansion. Do we capitalize on the momentum? Karen asked. We could spin this into a brand campaign. Or stay silent and let the merger speak for itself. Alicia took a moment. Then answered with careful precision. We tell the truth, she said. Not just about what happened to me, but what happens to people like us every day. In boardrooms. On planes. In line at the grocery store. We don't spin it. We build from it. The team nodded. Start with our internal culture, Alicia added. If the world is watching, let them see us treating each other with dignity that can't be negotiated. It wasn't about marketing. It was about mission. Later that night, she appeared on a nationally televised interview with NPR Nightview, a long-running, no-nonsense news program. The host, Dana Mears, asked bluntly, You didn't yell. You didn't cry. You barely said anything. Why do you think that video went so viral? Alicia smiled slightly. Because people are tired of shouting and not being heard. Silence used right can shake a room harder than a scream. That day, I wasn't trying to make a scene. I was holding a line. Dana leaned in. What line? The line that says, I belong here. I earned this. And I'm not moving just because someone else is uncomfortable with my presence. It was a quiet moment. And a powerful one. Viewers across the country sat in their homes and felt seen, many for the first time. But not everyone clapped. Trolls flooded the comments section of every outlet that covered the story. Anonymous users posted cruel edits, false narratives, conspiracy theories claiming she staged the whole thing for publicity. A few even mocked the airline's new Monroe protocol, calling it performative and woke nonsense. Alicia saw it all. And she didn't flinch. Because this wasn't about pleasing everyone. It was about the ones watching quietly, waiting for permission to finally take up space. The next morning, she received an invitation from the White House. They wanted her to speak on corporate responsibility and racial equity in aviation and public infrastructure. She would share the stage with industry giants and transportation regulators. She said yes. Not for the cameras. Not for the applause. But because when the world finally opens a seat at the table, you show up prepared to speak, not just for yourself, but for the millions still being asked to prove they belong. On her way to Washington, D.C., Alicia sat once again in seat 1A. This time, no one questioned it. No one laughed. And yet, she could still feel the ghosts of the last flight. The difference now? She wasn't flying alone. She carried every story, every message, every woman who had been told to wait, to move, to be quiet. And now the whole nation watched how power moved when it didn't apologize. Alicia sipped her water and leaned back. The plane cut through clouds. And somewhere down below, another girl was preparing for her first big meeting, standing tall in her truth, thanks to the woman in 1A. Washington, D.C. was gray that morning. Storm clouds hovered over the Capitol, but inside the Grand Summit Hall, a different kind of pressure swirled. The National Leadership Forum on Equity and Corporate Responsibility wasn't new, but this year, it was standing room only. Because Alicia Monroe was speaking. Not invited to speak, expected to. Her name was on every program, her face printed on signs beside dignitaries and CEOs. For weeks, the buzz hadn't slowed. Not just because of the airline incident. But because of everything that followed, the apology, the training overhaul, the viral quote, and most of all, the silence she held like a weapon. Inside the backstage green room, Alicia sat still, legs crossed, reading over her handwritten notes. The room was quiet, save for the occasional update from her aide. "You'll follow the transportation secretary," Brianna said, flipping through the schedule. "And then close out the session with a Q&A. They'll record the whole thing for broadcast." Alicia nodded but didn't look up. She wasn't nervous. She was focused. She knew the power of moments like this. She had 10 minutes on that stage, and she planned to make them unforgettable. The audience hushed as Alicia walked out, sleek in a navy blue suit, heels echoing on the polished floor like punctuation. She stood at the podium, fingers resting lightly on its edges, gaze sweeping the crowd. And then she began. "I wasn't supposed to speak today. Not originally. I was just supposed to be on a flight to New York, heading to close a deal." A few soft chuckles. But 5 minutes of refusal and silence changed that plan. Changed a lot more than that. She paused. "Let me be clear. This isn't a story about a seat. It's about how society still decides who's allowed to take up space. On a plane. In a boardroom. At this very podium." A hush fell. When I stood in front of seat 1A and said, "This is mine," I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was speaking for every person who's been told they don't belong unless they prove their worth, twice. Every black woman who's been mistaken for staff. Every immigrant whose accent was mocked before they opened their mouth. Every child who looked around a classroom and wondered, "Do I fit here?" She locked eyes with someone in the front row, a young woman who looked like she'd been crying. I didn't raise my voice that day. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply didn't move. And that, apparently, was revolutionary. A flicker of laughter and applause rippled through the hall. I want to be very honest with you all. Dignity is not a diversity initiative. It is not an HR checkbox. It is not a mission statement. It is a human right. And for too long, too many of us have treated it like a reward we can revoke. Alicia let that land. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "We make room. We acknowledge the people we've failed to see. We rebuild systems that reward silence and challenge those who speak." She stepped from behind the podium and moved toward the edge of the stage. I never asked for that moment to go viral. I didn't want to be a symbol. I wanted to go to work. But since the world chose to listen, I'm going to use this microphone. A pause. Your dignity is not up for negotiation. Applause surged. This time, not polite. Not performative. It was raw, emotional, and sustained. And Alicia didn't smile. She simply nodded. Then turned and walked off the stage. The aftershocks were immediate. Clips of her speech exploded across social media. Networks replayed the line, "Dignity is not a diversity initiative," on loop. Commentators called it the most powerful corporate address since Steve Jobs' Stanford speech. But the real response? Policy. 3 major airlines launched immediate audits of their VIP seating protocol. A top consulting firm hired Alicia to build a cross-industry equity strategy. And schools began using her story in leadership curriculums across the country. She had become more than a CEO. She had become a standard. That night, Alicia returned to her DC hotel, exhausted but energized. Brianna handed her a folder. "This came during your panel." Alicia opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter on thick cream paper. It read, "Ms. Monroe. I was on your flight. Row 3C. I didn't say anything that day. I watched, frozen, like everyone else. I've thought about that moment every hour since. I'm a VP at a finance firm. And I've benefited from silence my whole life. But because of you, I've started something new. Our company just launched a mentorship fund for young black women entering the tech and finance sector. It's called the 1A Initiative. You didn't flinch. So now, we won't either. Thank you. Michael Denton." Alicia closed the letter and sat quietly. Sometimes a moment at 38,000 feet changes everything. And sometimes, the turbulence isn't the problem, it's the point. The next time Alicia Monroe boarded a plane, she didn't check in through the VIP lane, she walked in as the keynote speaker for the airline's executive leadership conference. The irony was heavy. The same company whose crew once hesitated to believe she belonged was now flying her in as the face of their most ambitious equity initiative in history, the Monroe Protocol. When she stepped onto the jet bridge, the staff stood straighter. Some nodded, some smiled nervously, all aware of who she was. Alicia didn't need applause or red carpets. She noticed the changes, subtle, but real. The staff was more diverse. The tone more respectful. The gate agent, a young Latina woman, met her with a quiet, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Monroe." No hesitation. No condescension. Just recognition. Alicia took her seat in 1A. This time, no one questioned it. 2 months had passed since the incident that went viral. And in those 2 months, Alicia had closed the $2.4 billion merger, testified before Congress, partnered with 3 Fortune 100 firms on systemic bias reform, and quietly funded a national fellowship for young black women entering aerospace engineering and corporate law. She hadn't spoken much publicly after the Washington speech. She didn't need to. Others were speaking now. An interview with a flight attendant who'd been on her plane. A podcast episode by a teacher who used Alicia's moment as a classroom case study on moral courage. A viral TikTok duet by a teenage girl walking into a scholarship interview playing the video of Alicia's calm refusal in the background. It wasn't performative. It was personal. At 38,000 feet, Alicia stared out the window as clouds drifted past, soft and indifferent. She remembered something her grandmother once said. "Sometimes, you're not the storm. You're the pressure that makes it impossible to stay quiet through one." That's what this had become. Not just a storm. A shift in pressure. Because dignity, once claimed, didn't go back quietly. When she landed, her driver handed her a small package left at the hotel's front desk. Inside was a note from a woman named Estelle in Birmingham. It read, "My granddaughter got accepted to MIT. She said she wanted to sit where you sit one day. You showed her how. I don't have a lot of money, but I enclosed her first pair of heels. She'll walk in them the day she flies to Boston. Thank you for not moving." Alicia folded the note, placed it back in the box, and exhaled slowly. This This was the seat that mattered. The next board meeting was held at the new Axionotrion Innovation Campus, designed with glass walls, inclusive spaces, and a leadership council now half women, nearly half people of color. Not to meet quotas. To reflect reality. Because innovation didn't come from power cliques. It came from perspective. From rooms where no one flinched at presence. Where no one had to prove they belonged. Alicia stepped into the boardroom with quiet grace, the same way she had walked onto that plane. Except now, the world knew who she was before she even sat down. In a closing interview with Forbes, a journalist asked, "Do you ever think back to that moment on the plane?" Alicia smiled faintly. "All the time. Not with anger. Not even with pride." "What then?" "With clarity," she said. "Because I learned that power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the act of not moving when the world expects you to vanish." And that's the true story of how Alicia Monroe, black woman, CEO, and symbol of dignity, refused to give up her seat and ended up shifting a national conversation. Her moment of stillness reminded millions of us that silence can be stronger than rage when wielded with wisdom, and that the right to take up space, any space, is not something you earn by permission. It's something you already possess by existence. Your dignity is not up for negotiation. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their worth. Comment below with your city. We want to see how far Alicia's strength has traveled. And don't forget to subscribe to True Echo, where every week, we tell the stories that reveal the power of truth, quiet courage, and unshakable justice.